Welcome to another GotBooks show. I'm your host, Tim Ward. We have our friend Dave Lane on the line, our CEO from Evolve Publishing. We're going to talk a little bit about the submissions process. Hi, Dave. Welcome.
Hi, Tim. Good to be here again.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. So I've been in line before submitting to Evolve Publishing.
Yeah.
I survived, right? So as a survivor, I want to take the opportunity to walk through the process with Dave. What are you thinking, Dave? What should we start with? The right way to do it or the wrong way to do it?
Well, yes. Because you can't talk about one without talking about the other. So, um, the right way to do it is, first of all, follow and we'll point some of this out here in a little bit, but follow our submission guidelines. If you don't follow our guidelines, if you don't send to the right email address, if you don't send me the right kind of file, um, probably I'm not going to review it. It's going to go into an auto reject folder because, to be honest, if you can't at least make some attempt to follow our guidelines, then you're probably not somebody I want to work with anyways. And I have so little time. My time is so precious that I need the authors to really to help me help them um, work through this process. So it's not difficult and it's not really terribly complex. And it's all laid out clearly. So I just would, first of all, ask authors, follow the guidelines. Secondly, send us your best work. I mean, you hear that from literary agents and publishers all the time, but this is a really competitive business. We're very careful about who we bring on, the material that we bring on. We have worked now for going on 13 years to really build a brand reputation where people, when they think about Evolve Publishing, they think about high quality books. And that's not something that we're willing to compromise on. I don't think we can compromise on it without hurting our business. So we're not going to do that. In fact, when we bring new authors on, I always tell them it's a tough business where we can make precious few guarantees. Usually the only two guarantees I can make is we're going to work hard at it. We're going to do our very best and we'll make happen whatever we can make happen. And beyond that, the only other promise is that we're not going to compromise on that quality guarantee because that's who we are. That's the brand that we've established. It's working for us out there. We have award sites where we have really strong reputation. We have review sites where we have a really strong reputation. We have readers who come back for our books time and time again. We don't want to disappoint any of those folks or any of the new readers that come on as we bring on new books. So send us your best work. Make sure you've got it relatively clean. There's no such thing as perfect. And if we do bring you on as an author, we're going to put you through our editing process. So, doesn't have to be perfect, but put your best foot forward. I will tell you, and I think we've talked about this before, Tim, but we have about a 95% rejection rate at Evolve Publishing. And I never really thought that would be the case. I always thought in the past that was kind of lazy on the part of agents, um, since most publishers, at least the traditional publishers, work through agents. But I sort of changed my tune after a couple of years, and I realized exactly why rejection rates are so high. So ours is maybe a little better than your typical literary agency that probably runs about a 99.5. We're only at about a 95% rejection rate. But if you do it right and send us your best work, obviously you're going to improve your chances. And doing it wrong is you send it to the wrong email address, not the one that's listed on our submissions page. Um, You send me a PDF instead of a Word document. I need a Word document because I make notes in certain it's what I need. That's why we ask for them. So if you make a couple of blunders like that, sorry, well, probably you're not going to hear back from us.
Well, we writers take a lot of bumps and bruises along the way.
Yeah, I was one of those ones too, by the way. I think my first probably 30 to 35 submissions to literary agencies, I just got the form letter rejection. Oh joy. Didn't tell me a thing, nothing. That eventually changed, and I got a few personalized rejections, but rejections still, which, as we've talked about, kind of led me to starting Evolve Publishing. But yeah, so I've been down that road. I know how it is, and so I empathize with new authors, and I think that, frankly, I think we kind of go a little bit above and beyond what most others do in terms of trying to give authors that opportunity. As an example, quite often we'll see a piece where I see real potential, but it needs some work. It needs some basic revisions and some improvements. And I give them the opportunity to take that feedback, make the adjustments, and resubmit. It's not something literary agents do that I've heard of. We want to bring on good people. We want to bring on good work. So we'll do what we can in that regard, but we're not going to compromise our commitment to quality.
Sure. Do you have any genre preferences at this point?
That's been kind of fluid for us since we started, but I think we've settled in now where after all this time, we really know where our strengths are, and conversely, where we have just not had success despite everybody's best efforts. So we are getting away from some genres and really focusing now on about a half a dozen categories. Those are listed on our submissions page, as are the ones that we're not interested in. And again, if an author sends us one where we've clearly stated we're not accepting submissions in that category, they might or might not get a polite form rejection. They might hear nothing at all because we make it clear on the submissions page we don't want to see it in the first place. And again, time is precious for us. So if I had to say what our real strengths seem to be right now, I would say anything in the mystery, thriller, suspense, kind of broad umbrella, science fiction, fantasy, young adult, which of course can have any number of subcategories, and we're probably in 5 or 6 or 7 subcategories within the young adult blanket or umbrella. We've got some great literary fiction. Personally, I think some of our best books are in the lit fic category. We've got some really good ones. But it's a tough category to sell. It's hard. So authors just need to know what they're getting into there. Women's fiction, we've got some excellent offerings, and we've had some books that have done pretty well there. So we'll continue to grow in that category as well. Crime fiction, which sometimes overlaps with the mystery and thriller suspense category. Adventure fiction, which also tends to overlap a little bit with the thriller suspense. Feels like I'm missing maybe one, but I don't think so. I suppose I should mention like detective mysteries. I mentioned mysteries, but we've got several that focus on the detective subgenre that are really quite good, and that's a category we're always interested in expanding. So I think those are the primary ones.
Okay.
Oh, horror. I knew I was forgetting something. We've got an excellent category in horror. And it's funny because I was just looking at you, Tim, and thinking, you look pretty good with that new beard.
Yeah, I remember you doing this, and I was like, yeah, I do that now sometimes.
Yeah,
As
and
much
I
yeah.
immediately it just because your book out there, Godsknife, Revolt. I thought horror. That's what I was forgetting. So I was forgetting your category.
Yeah, well, that's all right. We horror folks are used to being the small percent of the shelf.
Well, I don't know. Sometimes it feels like Stephen King owns the world. You know,
Yeah.
Dean Koontz has had a little bit of success, um, which comes, by the way, when you've written 912 books or whatever. And I'm joking, but boy, he's got a big catalog.
Do you mind if I ask you one in particular?
Sure.
I'm reading The Gentle Slope now, your newest mystery.
Yeah,
What
by
was that
R.M.
like? Did
Lowry.
that come in through the submissions pile?
Did it come through?
Yeah, your
Oh
submission
yeah, yeah,
pile?
yeah. I think we have maybe two authors who came to me as referrals, where I kind of bypassed the normal process. But otherwise, everybody that's on board with us has gone through that process. And yeah, it was one of those. In fact, it's interesting. Um, R.M. Lowry was one of those where initially I said, I like the character. And a couple of the supporting characters as well, the primary and a couple of supporting characters. I said, I like the overall story, but there are some fundamental problems that you need to address before we'd be able to take it on. Would you like that opportunity to make the revisions and resubmit? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And I don't remember offhand how long it took him, but it was maybe a couple of months. And he made those revisions and he sent it back and said, okay, take another look. I did and said, okay, let's go. Now we can roll. So that's a good example of an and we have maybe 15 to 20 authors where we've done this. We first sent it back to them saying, sorry, it's not quite working for us. But if you'll do this, this, and that, we might change our mind and you can send it again and I'm happy to take another look. And ultimately we brought him on. So
Mhm.
and R.M. Lowry was one of those.
Yeah, I saw it. RM's doing a great job. I've been busy with health stuff, and part of the beard is just laziness, I think.
It's all
But
right.
I did enjoy all the time that I've read that this weekend. He's got good chapter endings, and I think I'm on chapter 9 or 10. So it's about halfway through. We're well into the mystery, so I'm enjoying myself.
Yeah, I look forward to that. He and I just had a discussion a couple of days ago, or, or yesterday. Yeah, it was yesterday. Um, about his series and where it might go, and because he thought it was going to be just maybe a 3 book series and that would be the end of it. I think I've convinced him that it needs to be at least 4. I'm pretty sure he's on track for that, and he has a willingness to leave it open ended. In other words, if it proves to be reasonably successful and there's some demand for it out there, and he still enjoys the character and wants to continue to write those, he'll do so. If on the other hand we get the 4 books out and doesn't seem to be too much excitement out there, then maybe that'll be it. And I think that's a fair approach for pretty much any author, you know. Since we're talking about the submissions process, any new authors that are looking at this might want to keep this in mind. You get that first book out there, and you expect it's just going to go like gangbusters as soon as it's available. It's going to sell hundreds and maybe thousands of copies right out of the chute. Yeah, not so much. Unless you have a really deep network of people that you've already established who might have some interest, the numbers are going to be quite modest with that first book. And then you get your second book out, and the numbers maybe are going to tick up a little bit because the second book is the point at which we can at least make some minor marketing efforts make some sense from an ROI perspective. The third book, those numbers are going to improve a little bit more. And for us, at least, our experience these last probably 5 or 6 years has been that the fourth book has, for the most part, seemed to have been the magic number for some of our authors. We've got, I think, 4 or 5 authors who really struggled, and we struggled with them through their first 2 or 3 books, and then their fourth book came out, and all of a sudden, we're making some real progress here, and we're getting some regular movement. So the old industry standard, they always thought of 3 as being the magic number. It's not really, this is not a new thing. It really has always been that way. But these days, perhaps because of the increased competition, the very crowded field that's out there, over 16 million books listed at Amazon, I heard recently. Wow. It's hard to go through that, jumping up and down, waving your hands, saying, "Hey, world, here I am. I'm an author. I wrote a pretty good book. You should come check it out." It's hard to get noticed in that, as when you're just a raindrop in the ocean. So having those extra books helps to make our joint marketing efforts more effective, because the metrics on the various marketing options that are out there are now such that that first click on an ad tends to be fairly expensive on a 1 book basis. Probably you're going to lose money. You need them to read through to the second book in order to break even. And then you need them to read through to your third book in order to start making some money. And then if you have a fourth book and a fifth book, and obviously it goes from there, then you start to make more money. So those extra books, that what we call the read-through opportunity, is really critical to financial success in this business. And until an author gets to that point, it's probably going to be a little more money out than what's coming in, which can be a little bit frustrating. But if they know that going in, and if their publishers are honest with them about that, or their agents are honest with them about that, because it's the same for everybody everywhere, then at least they go into it prepared with the, I hope, with the right attitude. And we're obviously, I'm talking about it here. We're an open book about this stuff. I don't pull any punches with authors. They need to know what a difficult business it is. If they are just, if money's not a big issue for them, and they just have this creative burn going on that they just have to write. And by the way, I was that way when I first started. Money, okay, whatever. When I first thought of becoming an author, I had a good job in those days, and I had a good salary, and money wasn't really a concern. But I had to write. I had to write, because if I didn't write, I maybe I couldn't sleep. I had to write. So if an author goes into the business with that kind of a mindset, well, then okay, maybe some of those financial concerns aren't a big drag on them those first couple of years. But if an author comes in and thinks, "Man, I got to make money right away," wow, they are setting themselves up for disappointment and failure. Because when that heavy disappointment hits, that they didn't make $1 million, the first month they released their book, it has a way of just killing an author's creativity, their drive, their motivation. So it's important to keep the mindset right and know what you're getting into. I can't stress that enough, because I've seen it with some of our own authors where they clearly became disheartened, disillusioned after just 1 book or 2 books, despite the fact that I warned them ahead of time that this is what was going to happen, because it always does. It's disappointing when that happens. I hate to see it, but that's the business. It's the long, slow grind. Welcome aboard.
Yeah, that you're saying that, I was thinking from the author's perspective, because I've never been a publisher, taking submissions anyway. We get to that point where we have the polished book, or hopefully we have a full polished book before we submit. Do you accept shorter packages to start off with, like a 50-page sample, or how does that work exactly?
The submission process is a minimum of the first 3 chapters. So unlike
Okay.
literary agents that are typically just asking for a query letter, where they expect you to sell them on your book within 1 or 2 paragraphs, it's part of the reason they have a 99.5% rejection rate, I think, because that's fairly well impossible, and it's always subjective, but that's ridiculously subjective. So for me, the work will speak for itself, and I think the 3 chapters is enough to get a feel. Now they are welcome to send the full manuscript, and I'm always happy when they do. Quite often, I'll read the first 2 or 3 chapters, and if it looks pretty good, I'll skip to the end and I'll read the last couple of chapters and see how they finished it off, and see if I can think of how they might have filled in some of those gaps. Um, so I always appreciate that opportunity as a publisher to see the full manuscript, but the minimum is the first 3 chapters. If you can't sell us on the first 3 chapters, then you're not going to sell the reader either, because no reader who buys your book is going to go through 3 chapters thinking, yeah, I don't really care for this book very much, and then continue to read. They're just not. So I think we talked about it in one of our previous discussions, but where I say, kick the reader in the mouth right from the get-go, right from page 1, preferably from paragraph 1, and try to hang on to that. The opening of the book needs to be really strong and solid. But then 3 chapters is enough for me to get a sense of whether an author really knows what they're doing in terms of creating a story. At least enough that I can say, okay, this could be. Send me the full manuscript now and we'll find out.
Yeah, we talked about that in the review about Forgive Me, Alex, and then maybe also some in the about Evolve Publishing. So
Yeah.
definitely recommend folks to check those videos out. My thought process was, I was thinking as an author, get this polished book to the publisher, and like you were saying about the high expectations, authors go through seasons where we start a book, it's a first draft, it's a little bit less tied down, and then we get to the final stage where everything is tied down, and it's almost like we forget what it was like to be writing from the seat of our pants a little bit. Even with an outline, even with all of our preparation, one of the things I've noticed is that fear of creating is not going to go away just from preparation. So with submitting a book to Evolved and whatnot, my encouragement would be remember that we're still creators and we still have a bigger picture to tell. And that one book that we submitted is just one of those steps towards getting to that bigger picture.
Yeah, and don't fall prey to the revision creep that just freezes you in place. At some point, you have to be willing to say, okay, I gave it my best. I'm going to send it in. Maybe I'll get some good feedback. Maybe I won't. And I'll be honest, when I do have to send a rejection, sometimes I include some feedback on ways or some resources they can look at that might help them to make it better. Sometimes I don't. If I don't, it may be nothing more than, holy cow, I got 32 hours of work to do today, so it may be just an issue of time. Or I hate to say it, it might be that I can't find anything terribly redemptive yet in that work to be able to offer some constructive criticism. So it's a difficult thing to be a good writer. I'm not sure when it happened in our culture that suddenly everybody thought they could just be a writer, could write a book and do a good job of it. Is it just me, Tim, or does it feel to you these days that that's everybody's attitude? Oh yeah, anybody can write a book. Really? No, no, not a good one. They can't. Um, it is a craft, and it is an art, and it takes some time and some effort. to get good at it. I think some trial and error is helpful. I mean, I wrote a whole book, a whole spy thriller that I ultimately trashed because no, the spy thriller I didn't quite finish because I was smart enough at about the 60% mark or 65% to realize it was garbage and I just gave up. I later wrote a horror, kind of a horror sci-fi piece that I did complete and that I did decide was trash and needed to go in the garbage. Uh, so ultimately, forgive me, Alex, my first book was actually my third try at it, and I learned a lot through those first two failures, I guess you would call them. I don't think of them as failures. I think of them as class, you know, as my study time. That's when I was educating myself and getting better at the craft. Um, so writers should never be shy about submitting their work, come what may. And if you get a rejection, go back to the drawing board. Don't try not to take the "Oh, that stupid publisher or oh, that stupid agent or whatever attitude. Um, be willing to look at yourself critically and say, okay, all right, what can I do better? Because that will serve you well as you move down the road in the future and get to a point where you do have pieces that are worth publishing. Um, the other attitude, you'll be no further down the road 20 years from now than you are right at this moment. And I can say that as someone who suffered the bad attitude for probably 4 or 5 years before I finally realized, maybe I'm the problem. It's a hard thing to do, you know, that kind of self analysis or that sort of self criticism. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but it is helpful. It will help you move forward. So,
Do you want to talk about the hybrid aspect of Evolved? What it's like to submit to a hybrid?
I'm sorry, you broke up at one point there, so I didn't quite hear it all.
Did you want to cover it all, Evolved being a hybrid small press as part of this?
Sure. Yeah. So, what does it mean to be
That mean?
a hybrid small press? Well, um, it means we don't function on the quote the big five traditional publishing model. We do have a few of what we call traditional contracts where we take on more of the burden and responsibilities of going from finished product to actually generating sales and doing all of that. But those are pretty limited for us. Most of our contracts are the hybrid publishing contracts, and it means that we give the authors, I think, a lot more freedom. But with that freedom, just as in life, comes responsibilities. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. And listen, it's not for everyone. We occasionally, I've had twice now a conversation with an author. We got to the point where I liked their books enough. I wanted to talk to them about publishing them. And we always have a long discussion before that happens. Like you and I are talking now, I'll talk with an author. It usually lasts about an hour and a half, sometimes even longer, because it's a big decision. It's a big decision for the author. It's a big decision for us. And it's a complicated business. And there's a lot to talk about. So we don't give short shrift to that. But a couple of times, you know, an author got to the end of it and said, "Yeah, you know that's not really what I was hoping for or expecting. I don't think that's the right model for me." Or in one case, he sort of pushed back and said, "Well, I don't want to do that, and I don't want to do that." And I said, "Well, have a nice day. Why'd you come to us?" So I have tried to make our submissions page um, as detailed as I can. There's a limit, and I think there's a limit to how much people are willing to read out there. So, but within the space that's there, I think we provide a lot of information so that hopefully they at least have some sense that they and we might be a good fit. I certainly hope that's the case. But as a hybrid publisher, in most cases, not all, but in most, the author is going to have to make some small investment in the services that are provided for them. It's not mandatory, but we try to go that route because we think that ultimately it's best for everybody. We don't have a cookie cutter approach to contracts. We really custom tailor our contracts on a per author, per book, or per project basis. We give authors a number of options. We let them pick the options that are best for them, and then we tailor the contract accordingly. And we try to make it work. So ultimately, a lot of the heavy lifting, including post-publication, is going to fall to the author because that's part of our model. But they also get the highest royalty rate in the business. I don't know of another publisher out there that pays royalty rates as high as we do. So that's part of the trade-off. Now, if the book doesn't sell, royalty rates are fairly meaningless because there's no sales to generate royalties. If the book does sell, then that can be a more lucrative process for the author in the end. It's not something that happens, week one, month one, year one. It might be a 5 or 6 year process, but they will get to a point if their books are moving where they're going to make more money at our rates than they would with the exact number of sales for anybody else. So that's part of the trade-off.
You guys accept submissions from more than just authors too. I saw you have editors and artists can submit, narrators. Do you want me to show the screen for the submission page? Is that
Sure.
helpful?
Yeah.
Let's see.
Okay, so it's up on the screen. Let me point out one thing for everybody. This is our main submissions page. You see there are multiple tabs there, depending on what you want to bring to our table. If you're an author, an editor, an artist, so on. Everybody should start with this introduction tab because it lays the groundwork for then what comes next in their own individual tab. So always start with the introduction page. I think that is and there's one of our other podcasts. I think there's a lot of important information here. And I think that they would be, hurting themselves and perhaps hurting their chances if they skip this page. If we then, I'll let go the discussion about editors and artists or narrators. If there are any such folks watching this podcast, you'll find what you need to find at those tabs and you'll be able to submit accordingly. I would like to focus at this point on authors. So if we could go to the author tab there, Tim. The first thing is you'll see up there, not the first paragraph, but the second paragraph. It says that we're open to submissions. A couple of times a year, that goes from a blue font to a red font that says we are closed to submissions until. We usually will close down for 2 to 3 months at a time if we're in a down season or if we have just an enormous backlog of work that we simply have to have some time to catch up on. We try not to get into a situation, I should say I try not to get into a situation where an author is waiting 3 or 4 months to hear from me about their submission. I don't want that to happen. I would prefer to just close submissions if it gets to that point until I can get caught up on everything and get back to the point where they're going to hear something from me within a few weeks. So that's an important place to start. Um, that that important note about sending all the submissions to that email. Every week I get a submission at the wrong email. I mean, every week. And I'll be honest with you, I just file them away in a miscellaneous folder and I pay no attention to them. Sorry, authors. This is fairly straightforward and simple. Um, in the red text there, and if you'll scroll down just a little bit, Tim, now we're going to see some blue text. You asked about our genres earlier. So we have 6 listed that we do not currently accept. Romance and erotica, we had some early on, and still our best-selling book of that we've ever had was in the romance category. But ultimately, it's not really our forte. There are a lot of publishers out there that are doing romance well, that are focused in that genre, and we just made the decision that that wasn't really for us. I love kids' books. I think almost nothing is more important to a child's intellectual development than their learning how to read and enjoying reading from a young age. But man, we had some really, really good kids' books and we couldn't sell them. We just couldn't sell them. I think that the children's book market is fairly well consolidated within a couple of publishing companies primarily, and they're the ones that have the inroads into schools and the rest of it. And so, like Scholastic, everybody's heard of. Um, so we just finally had to say, all right, as much as we hate it, we can't sell them, so we can't justify trying to stick it out, and we got away from the kids' books. But most of the other genres are represented down there, down below, and we have some real strength in all of those categories. Um, Obviously, we have some books that have done very well and some books that haven't done as well as we hope. We're not prepared to give up on any of those, but some have proven more of a challenge than others to sell for various reasons. But if you've written a book out there, author, in one of those 10 categories listed, we certainly want to see it if you think we're going to be a good fit for you.
Nice.
If you scroll down just a tad more there, Tim, the who are we looking for? This is really important for Evolve Publishing because the team, and Tim, you can speak to this, having been a part of the team for a number of years now, that team environment is really important to us. I don't know why traditional publishing treats every author as an island. I think it's a mistake on their part. We try to leverage our authors' catalogs against one another in the hopes that if you, writing horror, Tim, are building an audience for your books, that one of our other horror authors might be able to take advantage of that, and vice versa. So we do some shared promotions, or we do some shared newsletters, or we do some shared blogs, or whatever it might be. We do special previews in the backs of our ebooks of other books by other authors in that same category. We do everything that we can within reason to leverage our authors in one category in such a way that they can help the other authors in that category. And what goes around comes around. So this might help you today, and you might help a different author tomorrow. So the team environment is very important for us. We want people to come on board who agree with that essential philosophy and are going to participate accordingly. It's not a lot of time required of the authors, but a little. And if we ask them to take 10 or 15 minutes out of their week to, participate in some sort of a social media blitz we're doing, or share a couple of posts, or perhaps, set up a blog share with another author in their category, whatever it might be, we would hope that they're going to be interested enough and engaged enough to do that, because it doesn't just benefit the author they're doing that with, it also benefits them. And this is a big part of what we do. That team environment's very important to us. The other thing I wanted to mention here is that we do accept submissions of previously published works, providing the rights are or can be completely unencumbered so that we can contract for them. But, this is kind of a big but, we're going to have to see something special there. If you've previously self-published your books and they're not performing, there can be any number of reasons for that. But it obviously worries us a little bit. So I need to see something there in the work, something special. I need to see something maybe special in the author. Maybe it's nothing more than a case of your self-published author who's got a couple of books and just can't seem to crack that nut. Man, we see that all the time. So that's a possibility. Maybe we can help. But if you're sending us previously submitted work, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you to convince us to take it on. So convince me. You're going to send us a submission. You have an opportunity to tell me why in that submission we should consider your work despite the fact that you've self-published it previously. Why do you think we as a publisher would be interested? Sell me on it, and we'll see what happens. And I think the rest of that is fairly self-explanatory in terms of laying out the general processes and providing some helpful hints for them. We don't need to go over every one of these things here. I think it's pretty clear. But I do want to point out one very, very important resource. So Tim, if you'll go up to the very top of the page to the menus and hover over that submissions menu with your mouse and click on that resources for writers, authors, if you're looking here, resources for writers. This is an important page. Tim, if you'll click on that. So what are these? These are articles that are written either by me or by Rob Grindstaff. He came to us initially as one of our authors, an excellent author with some great books. But he's also a longtime editor. He was in the newspaper business for, I don't know, 130 years. No, he's not that old. He's retired now, but he's been a longtime writing coach. He's worked with a couple of very successful authors, including at least one best-selling author out there, named Jonas Saul. He helped Jonas, I think, with his probably roughly 20 of his books, I think. If you scroll down the page here, Tim, then you'll see Rob's mugshot and some articles that he's written. If you take, as an author, we don't have a style guide as a publisher, but these articles that are all listed on this page, taken as a whole, kind of function as our de facto style guide. If you read these articles and you apply what you learn there to your work, you're going to end up being a very good writer. And you're going to improve your odds of success significantly. And then at the bottom of the page you just showed there, those are just some books that I recommend, having read all of them myself. I read probably about 90 books on writing, editing, publishing over the years, 90 to 100, something like that. These are ones that really stuck out for me as being helpful to authors. So always worth an opportunity, a chance if you're looking to hone your craft.
Yeah, those are some really good ones. Enjoyed on writing and elements of style.
You know, the elements of style is really more of a reference book.
Yeah.
But I think it's a must. I think if you're a professional or want to be a professional writer and you don't have the elements of style at your fingertips, you're making a mistake. Um, On Writing is, I think, by Stephen King is excellent. I love the next two that are listed there. Make Your Words Work by Gary Provost and Making Shapely Fiction by Jerome Stern. Those both had a really big impact on me as an early writer. The Art of Fiction is a little bit more it's a little bit more high level, I would say. But if you've progressed to a point where you feel like you're doing pretty well, but might be able to kick it up just that extra little notch, then The Art of Fiction is good reading. And like I said, these are all worthwhile if you see something there that you think is going to help you.
Mhm. Yeah, I enjoyed your articles too. I remember reading through those many seasons of my life when I first met you and after and when you were editing. So yeah, those are good.
Well, I before starting Evolve Publishing, I had been a freelance editor, and I did that for a few years. And as part of that process, I wrote a bunch of articles, and that I haven't had even time to go through all of these. I might I might polish a few of them up at some point when I don't seem to have anything to do, like in the year 2119. Um, it's it was a bit of a labor of love for me, but I've heard so much good feedback from authors who said, wow, I never quite understood that particular issue very well. This was really helpful. So most of them include examples, very simple, this is bad, this is good examples. So I hope authors will take advantage of these being out there. Um, I think they're a good resource. So the last thing I would like to say, Tim, on the submissions front is that we are pretty tough at Evolve Publishing. I mentioned the 95% rejection rate. We had small periods of time where maybe it was a little less than that. There was one year in particular where our rejection rate was only about 85%. We had fewer submissions, but the quality level of just seemed to be higher. Um, and then we had one year where I think we only, probably we were closer to 99%. But overall, we've averaged about 95%. And I don't want authors to be scared off by that. I want them to feel challenged by it. Use that as a reason to make your work better and to kick everything up a notch, and take your best crack at us. And who knows what'll happen there.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully we authors have more than one book in us. So if the first one doesn't work out, we can go to that well again.
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't write another book. Once I wrote Forgive Me, Alex, and started submitting it to agents, I didn't, after getting the first several rejections, give up and say, okay, I'll write something else. I went back to the drawing board and said, well, how can I do it better? And I ultimately, and I think we talked about this before, but I ultimately had something, and I always forget, I have to look at the file. It was either 24 or 26 versions or something like that, that ultimately is what people see out there now. I think it's version 26, I think. That's what sticks in my head. So sometimes a version change might have been one particular writing bad habit that I had, one word that I just overused terribly. And I might just go through that version and look for that word and just get rid of it everywhere I could. Like the word just. I'm just so guilty of just overusing the word just. It's just that I just love that word. It's just so just amazing. Uh, apparently, because I had in an early version of Forgive Me, Alex, I had something like 312 instances of the word just. I said, oh no, you got to be kidding. And I went through and now I have maybe, 12 or 15. So um, we all have bad habits that we bring to the table as writers. I recommend that authors set up a little cheat sheet for themselves when someone else identifies one of their bad habits. I created what I call the bad habit list for myself, and I have about 50 items on there. It could be words, it could be particular phrases, it could be uh, things, simple mistakes that you know, too many adverbs in certain situations, around dialogue. It could be any number of things. But as I write new material, I will periodically kind of glance back at that list and check my work in progress to make sure I'm not getting too crazy here. Because a lot of these things are sort of built in now, you know, they just are a part of my speech patterns, which tend to roll into a part of my writing pattern, which isn't always good. Sometimes, in fact, it's really not good. So I recommend that authors maintain a document where they're identifying their own problems and use that as a regular reference when they're writing new material. I do it, and I don't think I could create anything that I would be truly happy with if I didn't have that as a resource.
I think notes from the editorial process is a really helpful stage for the writer to master,
Yeah,
seeing how an editor polishes our work, and just accepting changes isn't always the best. It's good to realize what we're doing and ingrain it into our next work.
yeah, maybe in one of our future discussions, when we talk a little bit more about, for example, the editorial process, we'll go into some of that.
Sure.
Because I will just say this, I think our editorial process at Evolve Publishing is second to nobody, and I'm going to include the big five in that. We're very careful there. Um, and I'm not sure all of our editors are quite as maniacal about it as I am. Maybe Rob is close, but I've worked with all of our editors and had a little bit of training opportunity with them early on and laid out some of what I viewed as important. Um, the the rate at which we win awards, um, the rate at which we garner 5-star reviews, those are not by accident. That's by design, and that's our editorial process at work. The author does the heavy lifting, of course, creating the story. But I like to think that what we do is we help them to clean up the presentation in such a way that it just becomes a little more enjoyable for the reader. And we can talk about that when the time comes.
Sure. Well, thanks for making time today, Dave. Appreciate.
My pleasure as always.
We want those submissions to be top notch. So thanks for giving us some guidance. Well, we look forward to talking to you next time in our next subject, what it may be. Best my heart to you and to Mary. Have a great rest of your day, and God bless your work, sir.
Thanks, Tim. God bless you too. Take care.
Thank you.